Welcome to the Equipping Leaders Podcast Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional and overall leadership enthusiast.
And I'm Corey, a program manager, emerging people leader, and a leadership enthusiast.
We are doing a leader study of the TV show Z Nation, deconstructing the leaders, leadership decisions, and team dynamics of the characters on the show to look at how leadership is all around us. And even if we're not in a position of leadership, we can still demonstrate it in our actions, responses, and in the opportunities around us.
Z Nation aired from 2014 to 2018, but if you haven't seen it yet, there will be spoilers in these episodes. In this episode, we're talking about Season 2, Episode 9, Roswell. Let's jump in.
We're now moving into Episode 9, Roswell. And this episode brought a lot of different aspects to things that leaders deal with, and also different types of people that people will follow based on information or misinformation. So what were some of your takeaways from this episode?
To start out, what I thought was interesting was this is one of the first times where the team and Warren are facing an unknown problem, right? An unknown threat. So everything up until this point has been like pretty well established. It's either a zombie or like a bad, a group of ne'er-do-wells, as I like to say. And this is the first time where it's sort of this they don't know what the threat is, right? And then the fact that they're in Roswell, right, that kind of lets their minds wander a little bit. And that's, I thought was interesting about that is it's like in that absence of data, right, we start to try to draw conclusions based off of the little data that we have. So it's like you're in Roswell, New Mexico, there's weird flying things or weird spooky things happening. It's got to be aliens, right? So I just thought aliens. So I thought that was really interesting. And I thought it was really interesting too, because Warren, I think, really starts to rely on the team a little bit more to gather that information again. And I think you see that play out throughout the episode.
I agree with the whole Roswell piece. That was one of the notes that I took, was sometimes when you have a place or a situation that's surrounded by so much folklore, you have to remember that that is in people's brains. And even though logically we're like, no, like that doesn't make sense here, that's not the same thing, Roswell is classically surrounded by a lot of folklore and a lot of legend. So them being in that place just makes you more susceptible to it. It's like after you watch a scary movie and you're home alone at night, you're just more susceptible to being scared. And then I think at the beginning too, when they are driving down that road in Roswell and they see something, they see a light in the sky, but then they start to tell stories to each other of things that experiences they had or things that they heard. Like Warren tells the story about her father being an Air Force pilot and how he saw something similar, and that made him a believer. And so we get to see a little bit more about her, but then also these kind of stories that we hear as children are things that also shape us, right? So it's like now you have, like with someone like Warren, you have like, we're in this place surrounded by all this like folklore, and then we also have this experience that was shared with her that could then make her just more susceptible to believing.
Man, you took that in a very deep direction. I personally was looking at it more like Roswell equals aliens, and so everyone's going to think aliens. No different than when you hear funding, funding constraints, or we're going to move in a different direction, or unstable markets. I'm getting laid off, right? I'm getting fired. Like that's where everybody's brain goes. Like that is synonymous with layoffs in people's heads, whether it's real or not. So I think it's interesting too now that that's going to pepper people's decisions and their inputs and their thoughts. And now Warren's going to have to deal with that as a leader moving forward, still trying to get this mission done. So everyone's just going to say that every zombie, because they're green, is an alien now. Obviously that's something they do, but people just jump to that extreme. So I think that's pretty interesting.
That's a great point though, too, is that while there are the things, the experiences around us, the environment, of course, shapes us. There is also the like heuristic availability of, I don't know what that exactly means, so I'm going to fill in the gap, and I'm not going to fill in the gap with something good because that's just not how the human brain works. And so no matter what, I know that I don't remember which company it was, but I remember like reading some of their like press releases. And then when they did like a summit and they were talking about some of the internal changes they were doing, they said, we were doing a reorg and everybody was convinced that they were getting fired. Like everybody was convinced. He goes, and we told them dozens and dozens of times that they weren't getting fired and nobody got fired. He goes, but that like you were saying, once it's in there, oh, it's aliens. That's what it is. And it can't be anything else. And you can't hear the other input that's coming in. It's almost like that amygdala hijack where when that fight or flight, that amygdala hijack happens and that takes over, it actually like shuts down our brain for a few minutes, like 15 to 20 minutes, and we can't take in new information. So sometimes you're like, oh, I keep telling people this. It's like, so that amygdala was hijacked. And so they didn't hear what came next. So that's another reason why, and we've talked about this before, leaders need to communicate often and consistently and make sure that their message is very consistent and they're being as transparent and clear as possible.
Yeah, that's a really great point too. The other thing I thought was interesting when they show up at the restaurant, like they have that guy, he's trying to collect data, like, why did you come here? Were you drawn by an inexplicit were you drawn by a force you didn't know? Or were you did you see something? Were you teleported here? He's tracking all this data, right? And I just think that's really interesting because it's the zombie apocalypse. Who's that for, right? It's just for him, but maybe in a past life, that's what he did for a living. But people fall back on those sort of like the skills that they know and their strengths. And I also think it's one of the first times you're seeing like a lot of like detailed organization from a group, even if it is as sort of ridiculous. But I thought the team was pretty funny because for them, they operate very organically and they're kind of just going off of gut. They verbalize things. They're not really writing things down. So when this guy's taking those notes, it seems very foreign to them. And I think that's interesting too, because sometimes you'll have teams, or as a leader, you'll leave one organization, go to another one, and they might have an entirely different way of operating to what you're used to. And there's like that adaptation that has to happen. And a lot of times you can get a little defensive, like first off, like, why are you writing all this down? Right. It's just weird. So I thought that was pretty interesting too.
I viewed that definitely in a different way, that in taking in that information, it was trying to find a common thread to see like, not only for them to be able to kind of compartmentalize and kind of bucket people to be like, oh, what was it that drew you here? But then I'm going to put you with like-minded people so that you have a group. And I think ultimately with something like, I don't want to say it's a cult, but when you have something that is,
you kind of said it was a cult, but just go on. I'm sorry.
When you have something that's so enthusiastic around something that can't be proven, it helps to, like, you want to draw people together in ways where it's like you had this amazing otherworldly type experience, so did I, right? Because those two powerful words in the English language are me too. So it's like the same, like I experienced that too, and it draws people together. So I also saw that as like another way of like the internal workings to be like, oh, let's draw these people together.
That's a really good point. Now that because once they grouped everyone, that makes a lot more sense. But either way, I just think it's cool the team kind of came in, accepted this new reality, so to speak, a little bit, and then we're still trying to focus on what they needed to do, right? Which was get Murphy to California. And they run into the kind of a new leader person, like you said, that is leading folks from like sort of a different mission or a different like goal, right? Which theirs is get off of zombie infested Earth because the aliens are going to come pick you up and take you away. And I thought that those interactions were really interesting, because then they run into a lot of people that are sort of sharing their experiences, and like their belief structure in this goal is so strong And I think like the team is pretty respectful of that, even though they don't agree with it. And like there's definitely, obviously they have their doubts, but they sort of just like are going with the flow.
Yes, I said, so yeah, Bernadette, the leader of the alien enthusiasts. It was interesting because even as she was describing how the aliens only speak to her, she can't understand it, but she understands it later. And like all this sort of stuff, you could tell just they could not suspend disbelief. You could just tell by their faces, but they also weren't going to argue with it because, again, you have like this like cocktail of, I'm in this place. I saw something strange. I don't want to completely discount that. Also, it sounds not above board per se. So yeah, I agree. And the team, I loved how the team came together. And we also started to see some interesting, I don't want to call them fractures, but you saw Vasquez, I thought, kind of Vasquez and Murphy doing a different kind of storming in this one. So like at the very beginning when they're in the car and they're talking about aliens and they're all just kind of like sharing their stories. And then Murphy says, "Oh, don't make me bite you." And it kind of got quiet for a second because it's like almost like that too soon joke. And then he said, kidding. But it was interesting that it was like he is now in tune enough with the group that he thought to say kidding instead of just letting it ride like previous comments he would have. So I thought that was interesting to see in Murphy. And then another thing was when they're being, the alien enthusiast folks are feeding them, they're giving them this food and stuff, and they believe that Murphy is their emissary. And Vasquez just is very annoyed by all things Murphy at this point because we keep losing him. And so when they put the food down, he takes it and he throws it, like slams it in front of Murphy. And so it was just interesting because also Murphy didn't have a response to that. He wasn't like scared. He didn't have any response. He was just like, there's nothing I can do here. But what was so interesting is that you don't see him doing that with other people. You see him doing that with Murphy. So it's almost like the storming. Because you brought up such a great point the other day when you said he's like an individual contributor. And so it's like, it's not the team I have a problem with, it's this person. And because I don't I'm still not sure of the space, within this, or I like how these people operate, but not you, I'm going to target that one person. And that's what I've decided to storm with.
I think this is the first time where Murphy is also like it's established the team was never like afraid of him before, and they are now because they see like the power that he can wield with a bite, right? He can control your brain, he can take away your sort of like identity. And it's funny because I think about my like past military experience. Like Murphy's sort of like the army, you know what I mean? Like he can just strip you down and turn you into a number, and like you have no independent thoughts. You're going to follow the process, you're going to do what it says, and that's that. And so it's like I think that's also a certain level of control. Like Murphy has the potential to leverage a level of like control and micromanagement over you as an individual that's like super scary, especially because they're all there of their own free will. And so like the thought of being forced to just go with him because you have to, yeah, that's a pretty crazy thought.
Yeah.
But yeah, so they're going to Area 51 to meet the aliens, right? They're going to go find them and see them and do everything like that. And they're going over with Bernadette is her name, right? Yeah.
I don't know that they know that. So they know they're going to a secret location.
Okay.
I don't know that there has been a promise of them actually meeting aliens yet.
Well, it's Area 51. It's a secret location within a secret location.
I feel like you're falling into the same thinking trap that they did.
Look, they're out there, okay? And you've heard it here first.
Oh boy. I would just like to say that Corey's opinions reflect Corey and not everyone on this podcast or equipping leaders as a whole.
But
okay,
yeah, no. So what I think, like, they're putting a lot of faith in her, right? Because they're going to an unknown place that has, like you said, a lot of folklore around it, and they're just sort of following her, not blindly, but like there's like a lot of trust, and everyone is very wary of that. But and they show up, and then they do run into like a few zombies, and I think what's really cool is they have these uh, like secondary goals, right? That are in support of the main one. One of them is like to maintain contact with Citizen Z. So when they show up to this place, they assess the surroundings. Like one of the first things that Addie asks is like, "Hey, is there a radio room, a comms room, anything like that?" And she goes to go find that. So I really think that that's we've talked about it a lot, but um those clearly defined goals and objectives like really allowed the team to operate more effectively, and it also allows Warren, I think, as a leader, she's still obviously concerned, worried, and aware of all of those things, but they can go to the back of her mind a little bit because she's delegated that like responsibility a little bit to other people around the team. And I think that's the power of empowering a team and not micromanaging a team, right? Is it allows you as leader to work more freely, and you're also giving that responsibility to those other people that obviously want that, because otherwise they wouldn't be there if they didn't also agree or believe or buy into like what the goals were as well. So I thought that was pretty interesting too.
No, I really appreciate that because I mean, that's delegation at its finest, right? Like as a leader, you can't do all the things you've truly been assigned to do. It's an impossible task. That's why you're in a leadership position. You have people who you then trust and empower to do it. And it's really interesting too that the team on Z Nation is at a place where it is essentially like they say in the military, like a fire and forget. She doesn't need to worry about comms because Addie's got comms. She doesn't need to necessarily worry as much about a zombie attack and worrying about what every single person is doing because she's got 10K in Vasquez. I mean, they're all, able to fight, but it's just like there are things where she knows their strengths. She knows that they're going to work well. So she doesn't have to busy her mind or keep all of that in her head all the time. So I agree. And it was really interesting too, when they're in that underground place. So they're all in, of course, together. And there's this, as they're seeing these aliens, as they're seeing these zombies, both, pardon me, the communication between them is so tight. Like they know who and where and when, and like it's so tight. And what I loved about that too is it's like sometimes when things get really stressful and people are really like put under pressure, they stop communicating. And this team didn't. They kept communicating. They knew where each other was and kind of everybody's status all the time. And then when they kind of split up, and then we get to see Addie in, her strength zone when she has that big operating system. And she's like, I know this system. And then she gets to kind of start working through it. So I thought that was there was a lot of really cool stuff that happened that you got to see why this team is so effective together in that kind of underground area of Roswell.
Yeah, I don't know if you picked up on the joke when she also earlier you felt a little uncomfortable saying aliens, and I realized that sometimes the truth is hard. So I just want to let you know I'm here for you and respect that. Secondly, I thought that was really interesting with Addie was when she found that computer system that was very otherworldly, right? Big like touch screen holographic thing, and she was like, oh, it's a Linux system. I know this. And Warren was like, really? And she's like, no, I went to art school. But so it's like, she obviously navigated it really well and figured it out. And I don't know if that's just, good user, like UX design or whatever. But I just thought it was also kind of interesting because it was like, that little bit of humor, right, and levity that could be brought to that stressful situation, which I think a lot of times you can only see that when there's a lot of trust, right, and a lot of understanding, when you can have the latitude to afford those sort of like more personal moments in those sort of stressful, like mission focused situations. So
Yes. And, not only that trust and understanding, but also that confidence in oneself and each other's abilities. They say humor is one of the qualities that people who are great at resolving tough conflict and having difficult conversations, humor is something that they have in spades, because things are heavy and we don't want to take away from that. But if we can also lighten it a little bit and be like, not everything is so serious, and there is still humor, we are still just two people talking, there and all of that, that's been proven to be very, very effective. And some of the people who, like I said, have been able to resolve some of the toughest conflicts, or have can relieve all the tension in the room, they have those things, right? They have that humor, that understanding, and that trust, but also that confidence in, you make a joke at the right time and it's the right joke, which sounds really stressful. But again, when you know your audience, and you know when to say that joke and to not belabor things.
Yeah, that's really good point. Sorry, again, thinking.
Yeah.
My brain runs slow, but yeah, I think the other thing too that's really important here when we talk about like moving forward is this is one of the first places where they find out about Zona, right? So, on that like futuristic computer system, and they start to question that, right? Because they're like, is that the name of the planet that the aliens are from? And then I think Doc even makes the joke like from the oh god, is that the name of the pie they're going to bake us into, which is from, oh my god, this show's right out of my head, please help me. They play it as a rerun every year on Sci-Fi Channel. Twilight Zone. Oh my god, Twilight Zone episode where the aliens come down, and it's like not how to cook for people, it's how to cook people. Don't worry about it, it's super meta. But but again, they have this new piece of, like, what I thought was interesting about that is they have this new piece of data, they share it amongst everyone sort of like spitballs through it, and then they keep moving. And then I think what's also really interesting is as you move forward in the episode of the scene and they start running into things that seem to confirm that like bias that they already had, that it's aliens. So, Men in Black types, very futuristic like energy weapons, and then they run into that like flying saucer ship. Not to mention all these people they've seen in like these like exoskeleton armor suit type things. Right, with that Zona, it's like, is that a planet, right? Is this an advanced civilization? Is this something that's, like what's happening here? So I think like that's really, really interesting that even though we now know it's wrong, all of that information is leading them up to believe that. But once they find out that it's not alien, that's like, I mean, I think Doc makes the joke like he's bummed out that it's not aliens because that'd be cool, but like they don't, once they've gotten the evidence to prove that it's wrong, they don't continue to try to find the evidence to prove them right. You know what I mean? Like I think that's pretty, they stayed flexible, they used the data that they had, and that's what they go off of.
Absolutely. I think it's super interesting too that when Bernadette, who leads this group of people, when she finds out that the truth about the existence of aliens, and then the decision that she makes in moving forward with continuing to allow people to believe in something that she knows is not actually accurate. I'm interested in what your thoughts are about that decision that she made.
Well, so first of all, you said that it confirmed about the truth about aliens, and that one I'm just like, we'll put a pin in that for a later discussion. But when she finds out in this particular instance that the aliens aren't real, that it ends up being, someone from, we find out about this whole Zona thing and just trying to recover all the tech that they can to bring back to the Zona place. I like her choice to allow them to believe in something like that. That is, to me, I know we had talked about like this cult like structure before. That to me is the moment that she decided to be a cult leader, right? Like that, like when she believed in it as well, that was just a group of like-minded people, and they chose someone who had qualities that they liked to lead them, right? Now she is deciding to lie to continue to lead them, because she's become probably comfortable with the security, the safety, and the power that gives her over people. So I do not look at it as her falling on a sword, so to speak. She actively made a very, very selfish choice. And I think that that's wrong. Because what if the aliens are not going to come to Roswell? What if the aliens are going to go to somewhere else and she's now trapped them there? We've suspended our disbelief enough for zombies. You can humor me that aliens are real.
You all can check out our new series, which is Corey, the conspiracy theorist, and Natasha, the conspiracy theory enthusiast. Okay, interesting, because I see what you're saying as far as like her decision and such, and to some measure, I agree. I also think that this is one of those situations where now she has backed herself into a corner. She has done that herself. She made a choice to continue this lie. It can be really hard to let people down. And that's a big thing. We've talked about this before. Telling people the truth and doing it in a kind way is something every leader needs to do. And I think that she knew how much that would hurt them and how uncomfortable that would make her. And so she prioritized her being comfortable and them just having hope over the truth. And so, yes, a selfish decision. Also, like, just like, we're social creatures, right? And especially in an apocalypse, I don't want to be othered from the group. And so there's like that aspect of it that's purely survival. And I think that we see that with leaders oftentimes who, I know that, like, I know someone who he was a lawyer and he wanted to be partner in this company or in this law firm that he was with. And then, you know, they kept kind of pumping him up, being like, yeah, I know that's going to happen, blah, blah, blah. Like 15 years later, it still had not happened. And so they had chosen someone else at that point to be a partner. And he was like, why wasn't, you know, and they were like, he just says, you know, why not me? And he said, well, there were these different things. And he said, why didn't you just tell me? And they said, we were worried we would hurt your feelings. And so it's like one of those things where you're like, so I've wasted my time for all this time because you prioritized your comfort and what you perceived as my inability to handle something over just being honest and letting me move on with my career. And so I think that's the other piece too there, is that, like, we don't give people enough credit. Sometimes people get so wrapped up in, like, people need leadership and people need this, that you're like, people are not running into brick walls without you. People are fine and they're adults and they can handle hard information. It doesn't mean they have to love it. It doesn't mean you have to be comfortable giving it, but it is something that they can handle, and it is something that they deserve.
Yeah, that's a really valid point too. And that's, I guess, where I come from, to allow that, like, you know, she's like, they said we have to wait a little longer, right? I feel like if you're trying to save people's feelings, you could have also just lied and said, like, we're not worthy, so they're not going to take us or something. You know what I mean? Like, you could have,
the type of lie.
yeah, you could have, if you were trying to save feelings, you could have done it that way, or save face, whatever you want to call it, right? Because either way, you're lying to people, or you could just say it turns out they weren't aliens, and that's that. But yeah, I don't know. The whole thing to me was, it was a very selfish move, and that's where I'm like, it's not worth it, right? Society has collapsed.
Yeah.
Zombies have taken over. People's feelings are already pretty much hurt, right? Like, you're not taking away anything more than the environment around them has already taken away.
I think it was interesting too, because now I would not recommend this because it's not a good leadership thing. As the leader, you're accountable, right? But she also had a prime opportunity with that Mr. I don't remember his name, Mr. Scully or something. The guy who was the pilot from Zona. She had a prime opportunity to say that he lied, right? And that would have been an out for her. Now, obviously, like in the real world, we don't throw people under the bus. We don't use scapegoats. As leaders, even though we can delegate authority and stuff, we are still ultimately responsible for things. So there's that. But it's just also interesting where this, if there was ever a shot for her to get out of this clean, as clean as possible, that was it. And she still chose, again, her comfort and saving their feelings over the truth.
Yeah. Well, now that you say that too, she could have just presented all of those facts, right? And not, it wouldn't have even been an out. It would have been the absolute truth. She could have said, it turns out they weren't aliens. It turns out that, I think you're right. I think his name was Mr. Scully. Like, Mr. Scully was apparently from some place called Zona. She could have walked people through that like secret elevator building room, drop down bunker place and been like, there's this weird computer that we found and everything else. And it turns out that a lot of these folks were zombie test pilots or test pilots who turned zombie from, back in the day. And she could have given all of that data, So I think that's, yeah, she chose, in my opinion, she made the very, very selfish choice.
Interesting too about the data that we choose to give other people, because leadership used to be that I have the information and I dole it out as necessary, right? And as appropriate. And we don't really live in that world anymore. People can find most things for themselves, right? There's very few things somebody's going to tell me that I can't Google or just ask a peer about. And so interesting that then it puts her in a position to be able to hold on to and essentially hoard information so that people do not become enlightened to what is in fact reality. That's a good point.
Yeah. And maybe that's like the underpinnings for where it bothers me the most is it's not the lie, it's the omission of the truths. Because I buy in a lot to that information radiator like concept and idea of data. And like as leaders, right, being a big information radiator and making sure that information gets out. So I think maybe that's the underpinning for where I see it, as to hold something back, unless it's a trade secret or something like that, is ridiculous to me. You know what I mean? Nobody wins that way.
But even then, holding it back from your team, like you have to trust somebody, right? So you have to like bring in people that you trust. And yeah, we could get burned. That's going to happen. But I also think it's better to go into something thinking that there's good possibility there than thinking everybody's going to screw you over somehow. And I mean, that's just a risk we all take in our personal lives. And also as leaders, that it's like, I'm going to trust them with this data. And the other side of that transaction, right? Because it is a transactional relationship in leadership, is that, it's you're not going to betray that.
Yeah, absolutely. But this whole situation, this whole another group that they ran into, everything like that, I think is really, after this whole thing was said and done, they also didn't leave with a lot of answers, right? They got a lot more questions. So now they have a new variable in Zona, which is they clearly have like time, money, and resources, as it were, because they have the ability to get into Area 51 and get experimental spacecraft, and they have very advanced weapon systems. So, that now is, I think, something that's very interesting, interesting to them. And so I think they're gonna have to continue to like mull over and unpack. So I thought that was one of the more interesting things about this interaction, is normally it ends with closure and it's a very micro effect. But I also think, at this point, watching it, the first time I ever watched this show, and then the rewatches, that because I really enjoy it, but then looking at it through the leadership lens, is very, very rarely does this team leave an environment better than they found it, right? It is through their lens, but through the lens of the people occupying that environment, they tend to be very destructive, right? Like very destructive to what was working. They come in, try to like kind of fix it, and then end up somewhat making it worse, right? And I guess that's through the perception of who you're looking at, but something's always left burning, to the point where, we find out later on, it might even be the next episode, like they start to get a joke of like, we were never wherever they were, right? Because it's like we were never in that place. We were never in Philadelphia, right? Like we were never in these places because they left them so worse than they found them. And then so it's like you can almost make the argument, are they a good team or not? You know?
Interesting, because yeah, then they're very focused, so focused on their own mission. And I think Warren says it, Warren and Addie say it in the Long Haul Trucker Run, the Zombie Road episode, where they're like, 20 truckers meet a group of 7 people and one Murphy. How many survive? How many of those truckers survive? And Addie says, like, not a one.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's such a good point. You're really making me think about this too, where it's like, yeah.
Oh God, did I just kill the podcast?
It's like, if you are an effective team, to what end, right? So you can be internally effective, but if it's externally destructive, is it truly a good team? Yeah, that's a really good thought. I need to think about it more.